Have you ever watched a behind the scenes of a film and see the cinematographer switch out the lenses multiple times throughout the shoot and wondered, why do they do that? The truth is that each focal length has a different effect on how your viewer perceives the story. And what's even better than that is that understanding each focal length is extremely simple and can help to elevate your films, your videos, and even your content creation. This is a crucial step in the filmmaking process of visual storytelling, so I thought we could talk about all of this today. Hey, what's happening, everyone? My name is Ryan, and today we're talking about focal length and how you could utilize these to elevate your next film. Let's get into it. There are many ways to effectively tell the story visually within your films, like depth, composition and framing, and even how different natural light throughout the day can impact the way our viewers perceive the story. Now, I put together a whole series around this whole topic of visual storytelling on my channel, so I'll leave a link in the description below if you'd like to learn more. But how does focal length fit into all of that? And why do some focal lengths ignite different emotions than other ones? Now, we're definitely gonna get into all of the different focal lengths and how they can affect the story and the emotion and the tone within your scene. But if you're anything like me and you want to fully understand the impact these focal lengths can have on your viewers, then here are a few reasons why. The first reason is because the focal length that you choose can work in tandem with the composition and framing of your shot. Let me explain. The focal length that you choose will directly affect the field of view of the camera lens. For example, a shorter focal length, like a 24mm, will often be used to create extensive shots that will capture a lot of the character's environment. This can be useful for establishing shots, showing a character's surroundings, or emphasizing the scale of the location, while a longer focal length, like a 70mm, can compress the perspective and are useful for isolating subjects from their surroundings. They are often used for close-ups and can bring distant objects closer to the characters and make them feel bigger than they really are. Another reason is because the focal length that you choose can affect the perception of depth in the scene. Shorter focal lengths, like wide-angle lenses, exaggerate the depth because it can make our characters in the foreground look a lot bigger than the objects in the background, which can create a sense of tension. And another reason is because different focal lengths can convey different emotions or moods. For example, a wide-angle lens can make their characters look very small and vulnerable by their surroundings, while a longer length can make our characters feel more isolated and distant. There are a lot of times where filmmakers will use focal length to creatively emphasize a character's emotions or reactions, which is actually something that I like to do in some of my films personally. And one other reason, and one of my personal favorites for utilizing focal length, is by using them as a technique to enhance the story visually. Filmmakers will often switch between different focal lengths to convey changes in a character's perspective or emotional state. A really simple way to do this would be to just start with a wide-angle shot to establish our character and where they are within the scene, then switch to a longer lens for a close-up of our character's reaction. The focal length that you choose will highly impact the way that your viewers will perceive the story, whether you're being intentional about it or not. So why not learn all the different ways that you could utilize these techniques as well as all of the other elements within the language of cinema so that we have full control over the story and the way the audience perceives it. But now that we've talked about why focal length is important, let's talk about how each one can have a different effect. The first one in the list that we're going to talk about is the extreme wide angle. Now, this could be anything from 18mm to 24mm. Now, truthfully, this can be a very stylized look, and for me personally, it's not a focal length that I typically go for, but it is really great for a few things, so let's cover those. The first thing is that it can cover a lot of ground. Like we mentioned in the beginning of the video, this could provide information about the character and where they are and the situation that they're in all at once. And the second reason is because some of these focal lengths can cause a lot of distortion. Now, there are a lot of folks that say this could be a bad thing, but I truly believe that that just depends on the context within the scene. With something like an 18mm, this can provide a very distorted look, especially on the character's face. This can provide a very useful feeling if used in an abstract way when our characters are in an uncomfortable situation. But on a totally different tone, something like a 24mm can be really great and useful for a YouTube video. A lot of creators use this focal length for vlogging and even sometimes talking heads because it gives us a sense of their environment and it makes us feel more like we're having a conversation with them. Now let's talk about the wide angle. This could be anything from 24mm to 35mm, and these can be used for when you want to get a wide angle without all that distortion. Now I like to use this a lot for my narrative work and for some of my documentary films as well, and I also use this focal length almost exclusively for all of my YouTube videos. I'll usually use the 24mm for when I'm vlogging and the 35mm for talking head sequences like this one. And it's just because I can get that wide space that I want for these talking head sequences, as well as when I go and do my B-roll, I have plenty of space for all the elements within the scene without it looking super distorted and just looking more natural. I also like the 35mm because personally, I just think it looks really good. For some of my documentary films, I can manage movement a lot easier within the scene because I have a lot more room to make sure that everything that is important within the scene doesn't get lost. I can get a really nice wide shot with all the information in the frame and still get a really great shallow depth of field. Now this is super important for me because I'm able to use this one lens for many different purposes, like we had talked about with the wide angle shot where I can get my wide establishing shot and then use the same lens to get the close-up of our character like I did here. I filmed both of these shots with the same lens, and that was the Sony 35mm 1.8. Now it's important to note there are a lot of really great options. The ones that I use typically are the Sony 24-70mm 2.8 G Master lens, which is a really great lens and is very versatile for almost everything that I do here. And I also have the faster and more affordable Sony 35mm 1.8, which I've used on almost every single YouTube video on this channel. There are a lot of really great options these days. You just kind of have to look for them and just find out what works best for you. But all of that actually leads me to my next thing, and that is the standard look or the natural look. Now this can be anything from 35mm to 50mm and is usually where I reside when I'm making any kind of narrative film or documentary film. These focal lengths can feel a lot more normal and natural than the wide angle lenses because the focal lengths are closer to what we see with our own eyes. And again, this is a really great way to get that natural look without sacrificing important information within the scene. Now, I've shot a lot of the films that we produced here with the 35mm alone, but if I need another focal length, I'm usually reaching for the 50mm. One really great example that I can give you is when we shot our documentary film Ago. In the interviews, we have two focal lengths. We used the 35mm for our main A-roll, and that's just because I wanted our viewers to feel like they were within the world of our main subject. And we also used the 50mm on camera B to get a little bit closer to our characters without it feeling unnatural or uncomfortable. Now this may be my preferred method to go to, the 35mm and the 50mm, but it really just depends on the story and what the script calls for, so definitely make sure to keep that in mind when you're choosing the focal length for your scene. And another one that we're going to talk about today are longer focal lengths like the 70mm and above that. Now this is a great way to get close to your characters without having to be all up in their face. Like I mentioned before, I like to be in the world with my characters, so I usually opt for a 35mm or 50mm so I can get up close and personal. But again, it really just depends on the context within the scene. There are many situations, especially when we're first starting out, where we will be filming an interview, let's say with a small business that's not used to the large productions and all the crew and lights and things like that. It can feel really intimidating and uncomfortable to have a camera right in their face. So you could opt for a longer focal length, maybe a 70mm. This is something that I've done even just recently for a client because I wanted our subjects to feel really comfortable so that they can give an organic answer to all the questions that we were asking. But beyond the ability to shoot longer focal lengths, this is also a really great way to compress the elements within your image. Like we mentioned before, this can make the elements behind our characters feel like they are much bigger and much closer than they really are. This can make it seem like our characters are in danger or even intensify what's happening within the scene, building anticipation. And one of my favorite ways to utilize a longer focal length is just to simply create contrast between our characters and all of the other elements within the scene so that the viewers can connect easier to the character and heighten the emotion that's happening within the scene. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, all of this can be a very simple and easy way to elevate your films. And with a little time and practice, all of this will start to feel like a second language to you before you know it. So I just want to encourage you to grab a couple friends, maybe some family members, or even a pet, and try some of these focal lengths out for yourself, because the best way to learn is by doing. And I know for a fact that by understanding the filmmaking process at this level and with your unique and creative perspective of the world, this is what will truly separate your films, videos, and even content from everything else out there. Well, that's gonna do it for me, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me in this video. If you like this video or you learned something, please click the like button down below. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers, friends.